It's a serial killer.
This story was exceptional because there aren't that many serial killers in Canadian history. And this was happening in our city. It was actually very close to where I live, so that there was that other element of it being close to home. And it was just so unusual.
Ioanna Roumeliotis has been leading our coverage on this story.
It was almost as if you're reading a terrible mystery novel, if you will, because the crimes were so horrific. But it was fascinating as well. And in a morbid way, you get caught up in the minutia of it, and always respectful of the fact that these are people's lives and there are families out there grieving. Andrew Kinsman's sister Patricia didn't want to go on camera today, but says at least now she can bring her brother home. The victims themselves and their families were in retreat. These weren't people that were sitting down giving these tell-all emotional interviews. So it was almost like that, the personal stories of these men kind of receded into the background, and the police investigation was at the forefront. How extraordinary is it for you to put a photo like this up at a news conference?
I've never done this.
So going to those news conferences, I watch the body language. I watch the police looking, more grim than you can imagine, and it becomes writing points of your script and of your storytelling. It wasn't one big shock and awe. Here's what happened, here's what we know, write about it. Every day there was one detail that seemed to make the last one less grisly, but I don't even know if that's possible.
We believe there are more victims on top of those 5, but I do expect more charges to be laid.
When a big police investigation is unfolding, my experience has always been that police will talk less rather than more. And then at the same time, it never hurts to ask. So we put in the request to interview the lead investigator, Hank Nsinga.
Well, I was angry that this had gone on in this city for some time.
I was struck by his openness and his candor, and by the fact that here's a veteran cop, and you can tell in his eyes that he's horrified by this case.
We're not going to leave anything uncovered.
I would always ask the question every time I'd see him, even for a background conversation, why do you think this man did what you're saying he did? And a lot of the time it's this big shrug. There's no real understanding of what makes somebody do something, especially something so horrific.
My only bad moments is when my mind wanders to the last few minutes of the victims.
That conversation with the homeowners on Mallory Crescent, that took months. It took months of phone calls, of conversations, of let's figure out if the time is right, when the time will be right. Because I think a lot of people wanted to know, what's it like to live in a home that was used as a crime scene? And we know this was where the majority of the victims were found.
The police rappelled down there.
These are people who had a relationship with a man who, he just appeared to be so ordinary and kind. And he had a family, he had kids, and he had grandchildren. It's very hard to reconcile and to piece together a portrait of somebody who was accused of doing such horrific things.
We still have trouble putting the man that we knew together with this alleged serial killer.
And speaking to the people at Mallory Crescent was one way to do it. So we were very eager to connect with them, to share their story, to share their perspective, their knowledge of Bruce McArthur, but more importantly, what it's like to live in a place that will now be infamously known as one of the worst crime scenes in Canadian history. Have you thought of leaving?
Oh, absolutely not. No.
The story was pretty all-consuming for several weeks, so the toll it took was more that it'd feel as if I was more tired than I was, or that my brain was not shutting off. It wouldn't shut off at night. It wouldn't shut off even in my dreams. I would be dreaming about this story. I'd be dreaming of questions I wanted to ask, or I'd be dreaming of the victims and thinking of their last moments even. Like, I had nightmares. Definitely I had nightmares, and it was very hard to separate the story because it was relentless. At least for several weeks, it was relentless in terms of covering it. You're working late, you're getting home late, it takes you a while to decompress. When you do, the dreams would come. It's that kind of acceptance, if you will, that you're not going to separate yourself from the story completely. So you manage it by exercising and meditating and remembering all the things you're grateful for in life. and acknowledging that sometimes these stories will stay with you even when you try to shut them out. They just stay with you. We're all human beings. It's not like a kind of occupation where you can just close the door at the end of the day, turn it off, and say, okay, I'm just not going to think about every horrific detail I just learned about today. You just can't do that. You just try to manage it as best you can. And eventually it fades, and it naturally fades when the story itself fades.